The train was packed. Sundar stood near the window, clutching a small bag and a rolled blanket. His ticket was for a lower berth, but someone older had taken his seat. He didn't argue. He simply smiled and sat on the floor near the exit door, watching the trees rush by. His mother had packed curd rice in a small steel box, wrapped in banana leaf, tied with cotton thread. As the train rocked gently, Sundar opened the box and took a bite. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear her voice. "Eat well, Kanna. Don't skip meals." Karagar was far. Over 30 hours of travel. He didn't sleep much. The sounds of the train, the snores, the distant baby crying, it was all new. But his mind kept racing. He thought about the future. He thought about his mother. When he finally reached the campus, it was like stepping into another world. Tall buildings, wide roads, students speaking English fluently. Some came in cars, some wore branded watches. Sundar stood there, in his loose shirt and sandals, and felt like he didn't belong. But he remembered his mother's voice again. "You belong wherever your heart works hard." The first few weeks were tough. He struggled with English. Sometimes he didn't understand the lectures. Students laughed when he mispronounced a word. He kept quiet. He didn't fight back. He listened. He watched. He learned. One evening, he was in the library reading a book about materials and semiconductors. He didn't notice time passing. The librarian came over and said, "We're closing." Sundar looked up, surprised. He had finished the entire book in one sitting. Outside, it had started to rain. Sundar walked back to the hostel slowly, letting the raindrops hide the tears on his cheeks. Not tears of sadness, not even of fear, but of determination. He began to improve. He made a small group of friends. They saw his brilliance, not his broken slippers. They asked for his help during assignments. He started reading English newspapers. He stood in front of a mirror and practiced speaking. When others went to the canteen, he stayed back in class, talking to professors. "How does a chip store data?" he asked one day. The professor paused. "That's a good question. Let's explore it." Sundar started staying up late, writing notes, making diagrams. When exams came, he did well, so well that one professor invited him to assist in a research project. Sundar said yes immediately, though he was scared. His professor smiled. "Sundar, fear is just a shadow. Walk through it." One night, Sundar called home. His mother answered. "Amma," he said, his voice shaking. "They've asked me to present our project at a seminar in Delhi." Lakshmi was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Your voice sounds taller, Kanna." He laughed. In Delhi, he gave his first presentation. His shirt was too loose, and his shoes were borrowed, but when he spoke, people listened. Not because his English was perfect, but because his ideas were clear. After the presentation, a man from an American company came up to him. "Have you thought about studying abroad?" he asked. Sundar blinked. "No, sir, I can't afford it." The man handed him a card. "If you ever do, let me know." Talent should never be limited by money. That evening, Sundar sat under a tree outside the seminar hall. He looked at the business card in his hand. He didn't know how yet, but a new dream had begun. He called his mother that night. "Amma," he said, "do you think your son can go to America?" She was quiet. Then she said, "If a seed from madurai can grow into a tree in Karagar, why not bloom in America?" And he knew he would go not to prove the world wrong, but to prove his mother right. The sun rose slowly over Madurai, and the streets began to wake with the sounds of morning. Little shops opened. Tea stalls sizzled. But one boy walked quietly, holding a worn school bag close to his chest. His name was Sundar, and he wore the same faded shirt and slippers he had worn for 2 years. His mother, Lakshmi Pichai, stood by the kitchen stove back home. She had been awake since dawn, boiling water, packing lunch in a small steel box. She placed a gentle hand on her son's head as he stepped out. "Study well, Kana," she whispered. "I will, Oma," Sundar replied, trying not to show that his feet hurt again. The rubber on his slipper had come loose. He had fixed it with a string from his old kite. At school, Sundar sat on the front bench. He always did, even though his classmates teased him sometimes about his old clothes or the way he spoke softly. He never stopped raising his hand. He asked questions about everything. He wanted to know why the fan made a humming sound, why salt disappeared in water, and how the wires on the street carried voices from far away. His science teacher, Mr. Ramon, noticed. One day, after class, Mr. Ramon called him aside. "Sundar, do you know what you remind me of?" Sundar shook his head, nervous. "A spark. It may be small now, but one day, it can light up the sky." Those words stayed with Sundar. He told his Uma that evening, and she smiled, hiding the tears in her eyes. "You always light up my sky," she said, brushing his hair with her fingers. But life was not easy. Lakshmi worked 2 jobs. She cleaned houses in the morning and folded saris in the evening. Her back ached, her hands cracked, but she never complained. She believed in her son more than she believed in fate. One night, Sundar heard his parents whispering. The rent had gone up. The landlord wanted more. They didn't have enough. His father sighed, looking older than ever. "Maybe I should ask the factory for overtime," his father said. "No," Lakshmi said firmly. "Your health comes first. We'll find a way." Sundar lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. He knew they were struggling, and he knew he had to rise not just for himself, but for her. For the woman who gave him warm rice when there was none left for herself. For the mother who wrapped her pain in silence and wore her strength like armor. The next day, at school, something happened. A visitor from Chennai had come. He was a guest speaker, a former student of the school, who had made it big. After his talk, he asked the students if they had any questions. Only one hand went up. Double quotes, "Sir." Sundar said, "Can you explain how voice travels through a telephone line?" The hall fell quiet. The man looked at the boy, surprised. He smiled, and then walked over to the chalkboard. For the next 10 minutes, he explained in detail wave signals, copper lines, data transmission. When he finished, the man turned to the principal. "This boy," he said, pointing at Sundar, "is special. Don't lose him." From that moment, Sundar became more than just a student. He became a hope. Lakshmi heard the story that evening from his teacher. She didn't say a word. She walked into the kitchen, and when no one was watching, she let a single tear fall. Sundar kept working hard. He studied late into the night. He borrowed books. He walked miles to the library. And when entrance exams came, he gave his all. Weeks passed. Then one morning, a letter came. He held it in shaking hands. His mother sat beside him, her heart pounding. He opened it. He had been accepted to study metallurgical engineering at Karagar. Lakshmi covered her mouth and wept. Her son, the boy with slippers and a dream, was going to one of the best institutes in India. That night, she sat on the floor with her son. No celebration, no sweets, just quiet joy. "I may not have much to give you, Kana," she said, "but take my blessing, go shine." And Sundar promised, "I will make you proud, Oma. One day, the world will know your name too." He didn't know how true those words would become. Sundar stood outside the U.S. consulate in Chennai, holding a folder close to his chest. Inside were his transcripts, a recommendation letter, and an acceptance letter from Stanford University. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of hope. He had been selected for a scholarship, partial funding only. He had saved, borrowed from friends, and applied to every support program he could find. He sold his bicycle. His mother even pawned her gold bangles, her last valuable possession. "If you fall, Kana, let it be forward," she told him. The visa officer looked through his documents and asked questions. Sundar answered with calm honesty. When the officer finally stamped the visa, Sundar stepped out into the bright sun and took a deep breath. He was going to America. At the airport, Lakshmi held back her tears. She handed him a small cloth pouch. Inside was vibhuti and a tiny picture of a temple god. Carry this with you. Wherever you go, this is your home. I'll write every week, Sundar promised, and I'll wait at the gate every Sunday evening, she said, holding his hand until the final call. The flight felt like a dream. The clouds below, the unfamiliar food, the sound of English all around him. It was like being reborn in another world. When the plane landed, stepped out into California air. Cool, clean, and so far from Madurai. But he didn't forget at Stanford. He felt small again. His accent stood out. His clothes were plain. Other students had laptops and lived in nice apartments. Sundar walked or rode a borrowed cycle. He shared a room with 2 other international students. He cooked simple meals and worked part-time in the library. But every Sunday, he sent a letter. Dear Amma, he wrote, I saw the Pacific Ocean today. It is endless, just like your strength. And every Monday, Lakshmi wrote back. Dear Kenna, she wrote, the rose you planted in the garden bloomed. It reminded me of you. Those letters became his lifeline. In class, Sundar stood out not for what he wore, but for how he thought. He asked different questions. He connected things others didn't see. Professors noticed. One invited him to assist in a project about internet protocols. Sundar agreed. You think in structures, the professor said, and you feel in patterns. That's rare. Sundar began dreaming in code. He read everything. He learned about how web browsers worked, how data was organized, how the future was being built, one line of code at a time. He sent home a letter. Amma, I want to build something that makes information easier for everyone, she replied. Then build it, Kanna. Make it simple enough that even a mother in Madurai can understand it. Those words stayed in his mind. One day, while working late in the computer lab, he saw a group of students struggling with a search engine. It's too complicated, one said. Too slow. And Sundar thought, what if it wasn't? He didn't know it then. But that single thought would one day lead him to a place called Google. But for now, he was still that boy with a pouch in his pocket and a mother's dream in his heart. When he graduated, he called home. Amma, he said, I finished my master's. There was silence. Then Lakshmi said, her voice breaking, you are already a master to me. The winter wind blew through the Silicon Valley streets as Sundar walked quietly, his hands buried in the pockets of his second-hand coat. He had just finished a long shift. His job was decent, but something inside him was growing restless. He wanted to do more. He remembered what his mother once told him. Don't just work to earn Kanna, work to create. That night, he stayed up sketching ideas on a whiteboard in his small apartment. Lines, boxes, questions. How can search be better, faster, simpler? He knew people wasted precious minutes every day trying to find information online. Sundar believed it didn't have to be that way. He worked on a prototype and shared it during a tech meet. Some laughed. Others listened. 2 weeks later, he got a call. Is this Sundar Pichai? Yes, we're from Google. We'd like to meet you. Sundar sat still for a moment. He looked at the letter his mother had sent just a day before. She had written, remember, Kanna, when the door opens, walk through it with your heart. He walked into the Google office, wearing a borrowed jacket and holding only a pen and notebook. They asked, why do you want to join us? He replied, because I believe information should be a right, not a privilege, and I want to make it easier for everyone. They hired him. His first task was to improve the Google toolbar. It was a small product, but Sundar didn't treat it like one. He studied how people used it. He listened to feedback. He worked night after night, not for recognition, but because he cared. Slowly, people noticed. He wasn't loud. He didn't boast. He just delivered. When Google Chrome was being considered, many inside the company were unsure. Making a new browser was risky, expensive, unnecessary, some said. But Sundar believed. Let's build it fast, simple, and safe, he said. Something even my Oma could use without needing help. It took months of research, testing, and setbacks. But he never gave up. When Chrome launched, it became a success. Fast, efficient, clean. One of the top leaders at Google said, "This man, he sees the future not just in code, but in compassion." Promotion followed promotion. His team grew. But Sundar remained humble. He still called his mother every Sunday. "Amma," he said once, "they made me a vice president." She laughed softly. "Then be a vice heart, also." During one company event, someone joked, "Sundar, you're too quiet for a leader." He smiled. Even silence can lead, if it listens with care. His honesty, kindness, and sharp mind won hearts. Then one evening, as he sat reviewing a report, his phone rang again. "Sundar, the board wants to speak to you." He walked into a room filled with serious faces. "We want you to take on more," they said. He didn't ask about salary. He didn't ask about title. He asked only one thing: "Can I still call my mother every Sunday?" They smiled. A few months later, the announcement came. Sundar Pichai was now the new CEO of Google. News spread across the world. But in a small street in Madurai, a woman sat by the window holding an old letter. Her hands shook, not because she was surprised, but because she remembered a little boy with a broken slipper saying, "Amma, I will make you proud." And he smiled. "I want to work here now, in Silicon Valley." She paused. "Then don't forget who you are. And never forget why you began." Those words became his compass. As Sundar stepped into his first tech job, he didn't see just code. He saw his mother's tired hands. He saw her walking to work in the hot sun. He saw a family that gave him everything without asking anything back. He made a vow: "I will build something that helps, something that lasts." And he did not know the world would soon take notice. The day Sundar was officially introduced as the CEO of Google, cameras flashed from every angle. Journalists, business leaders, and employees filled the room with applause. But Sundar looked calm. He stood on stage, wearing the same quiet smile he had since his Madurai days. Behind the smile, his heart beat fast. He wasn't thinking about charts or numbers. He was thinking about one woman, sitting in a modest house thousands of miles away, who once sold her bangles so her son could fly. Lakshmi Pichai. That name had never been spoken by crowds, never appeared in headlines. But she had shaped every part of him: his discipline, his patience, his strength. Sundar had written a speech for the day, but as he stood there, he folded the paper and placed it in his pocket. He spoke from his heart. "I come from a place where we had to wait 5 years to buy a refrigerator," he said, his voice steady. "My mother walked to the market every day to save a few rupees on bus fare. And today, because of her sacrifices, I stand here." The room grew quiet. People stopped taking photos. He continued, "Titles and success mean nothing if we forget who lifted us when we couldn't walk. My mother is that person. Everything I have today began with her prayers, her hunger, her love." His voice cracked slightly. For the first time, Sundar's emotions broke through his calm, and he added, "Uma, this is your moment too." Meanwhile, in Madurai, Lakshmi sat before a small TV with teary eyes. Neighbors had gathered around her. They cheered, they clapped, but she remained silent, pressing her palm to the screen gently. When her son's face appeared, someone said, "Auntie, your son has made India proud." Lakshmi replied softly, "He made me proud long before the world knew his name." Back in the US, Sundar finished his speech and stepped down. His team surrounded him, offering congratulations. Flowers, Messages, handshakes came in waves. Still, he slipped away quietly into his office, closed the door, and called home. She answered on the first ring. Amma. She didn't let him speak further. I saw everything, she said. You looked tired. Did you eat? He smiled, eyes full. Not yet. Then sit down and eat. Don't skip just because the world is clapping. That evening, Sundar sat alone and opened a lunchbox one of his team members had packed for him. Rice, curry, a small sweet. He took a bite. He remembered banana leaves. The smell of home, his mother's fingers pinching hot rice into small balls. Despite the power, the title, the lights, he still felt like the boy who once sat near the train door, dreaming quietly. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Sundar was invited to a special global summit, where world leaders and visionaries were to gather. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi was one of the keynote speakers. The event hall was grand, security tight. Sundar arrived early, keeping a low profile. He wasn't scheduled to speak that day, but fate had its own script. As Modi stepped onto the stage, he began speaking about India's rise, about technology, and the power of dreams. Then he paused. His eyes scanned the crowd. He smiled slightly and said, "Today, I wish to speak of a woman, not a minister, not a businesswoman, but a mother. Her name is Lakshmi Pichai." The hall fell silent. When her son boarded a train from Madurai to Karagar, Modi said, she didn't know he would one day lead one of the world's biggest companies, but she believed in him, and that belief shaped a generation. Modi continued, India's strength is not just in machines or markets. It lies in homes like hers, in mothers like Lakshmi. Sundar sat frozen. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared, and before he could stop it, a tear rolled down his cheek, not from pride, but from the deep, quiet echo of a journey walked in silence and love. Sundar stood outside the U.S. consulate in Chennai, holding a folder close to his chest. Inside were his transcripts, a recommendation letter, and an acceptance letter from Stanford University. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of hope. He had been selected for a scholarship, partial funding only. He had saved, borrowed from friends, and applied to every support program he could find. He sold his bicycle. His mother even pawned her gold bangles, her last valuable possession. If you fall, Kanna, let it be forward, she told him. The visa officer looked through his documents and asked questions. Sundar answered with calm honesty. When the officer finally stamped the visa, Sundar stepped out into the bright sun and took a deep breath. He was going to America. At the airport, Lakshmi held back her tears. She handed him a small cloth pouch. Inside was vibhuti and a tiny picture of a temple god. Carry this with you, wherever you go. This is your home. I'll write every week, Oma Sundar promised, and I'll wait at the gate every Sunday evening, she said, holding his hand until the final call. The flight felt like a dream. The clouds below, the unfamiliar food, the sound of English all around him, it was like being reborn in another world. When the plane landed, Sundar stepped out into California air, cool, clean, and so far from Madurai, but he didn't forget. At Stanford, he felt small again. His accent stood out. His clothes were plain. Other students had laptops and lived in nice apartments. Sundar walked or rode a borrowed cycle. He shared a room with 2 other international students. He cooked simple meals and worked part-time in the library, but every Sunday, he sent a letter. Dear Amma, he wrote, I saw the Pacific Ocean today. It is endless, just like your strength. And every Monday, Lakshmi wrote back. Dear Kanna, she wrote, the rose you planted in the garden bloomed. It reminded me of you. Those letters became his lifeline. In class, Sundar stood out not for what he wore, but for how he thought. He asked different questions. He connected things others didn't see. professors noticed. One invited him to assist in a project about internet protocols. Sundar agreed. You think in structures, the professor said, and you feel in patterns. That's rare. Sundar began dreaming in code. He read everything. He learned about how web browsers worked, how data was organized, how the future was being built, one line of code at a time. He sent home a letter. Amma, I want to build something that makes information easier for everyone. She replied, then build it, Kana. Make it simple enough that even a mother in Madurai can understand it. Those words stayed in his mind. One day, while working late in the computer lab, he saw a group of students struggling with a search engine. It's too complicated, one said. Too slow? And Sundar thought, what if it wasn't? He didn't know it then, but that single thought would one day lead him to a place called Google. But for now, he was still that boy with a pouch in his pocket and a mother's dream in his heart. When he graduated, he called home. Oma, he said, I finished my master's. There was silence. Then Lakshmi said, her voice breaking, you are already a master to me. He smiled. I want to work here now, in Silicon Valley. She paused. Then don't forget who you are. And never forget why you began. Those words became his compass as Sundar stepped into his first tech job. He didn't see just code. He saw his mother's tired hands. He saw her walking to work in the hot sun. He saw a family that gave him everything without asking anything. Back he made a vow. I will build something. Something that helps. Something that lasts. And he did not know. The world would soon take notice. The moment Prime Minister Modi stepped down from the stage, people stood and clapped. But Sundar remained seated, his head slightly bowed, hands clenched gently together. That one sentence, her name is Lakshmi Pichai, had reached deeper than any award, any honor, any speech in his life. He stepped outside, took a quiet breath, and looked at the sky. It was the same sky he once looked at from his childhood rooftop, wondering how far dreams could really go. That night, Sundar didn't sleep. He opened his drawer, took out a letter his mother had written years ago. It was yellowed now, soft at the edges. She had written, whatever you build, Kana, remember the roots. He decided it was time. The very next week, Sundar booked a flight. Not a business trip, not a tech event, no cameras, no suits. This trip was for one reason only. He was going home. When he landed in Madurai, there were whispers in the air. Some shopkeepers noticed him. Kids pointed. A few elders smiled, but he didn't stop for selfies. He walked straight, carrying a small bag and a bouquet of white jasmine flowers, at the gate of his old house. The door was already open. Lakshmi stood there, older now, thinner, her hair grayer than before, but her eyes, still the same. They didn't say a word for a moment. Then she simply said, Kana. And Sundar stepped forward and hugged her tight, like the little boy who once brought home school books heavier than his backpack. They sat together on the old veranda floor, just like they used to. No cameras, no interviews, only the rustling of banana leaves and the soft bark of a street dog in the distance. Amma, he said, holding her hand. Your name was said on stage by the Prime Minister. She looked at him, surprised. But why? She asked gently. Because, Sundar replied, eyes shining. You're the reason I could ever stand on one. Tears welled in her eyes, but she brushed them away quickly. I didn't do much. He shook his head. You did everything. He showed her photos from Google, of offices, of projects, of his team. She didn't care much for the fancy stuff, but when he showed her a picture of a small new computer being developed for poor villages, her face lit up. This one, she said, pointing. This will help children like you once were. He smiled. That's why we're building it. The next morning Sundar went to his old school. He walked through the same dusty courtyard, greeted by teachers who had once scolded him gently for daydreaming in class. The students gathered around, excited. He stood before them, but he didn't give a long speech. He simply said, "Don't let your background limit your dreams. You can come from a small street and still walk into the biggest rooms in the world. You can wear slippers and still climb mountains." He turned to the principal and whispered, "I want to fund scholarships for any child here who dares to dream." The students clapped. Some teachers cried. Before leaving Madurai, Sundar took his mother to the temple they once visited when he was young. They lit a lamp together. He didn't pray for more success. He prayed for strength to give back. As they walked back, Lakshmi leaned on him gently. "I can't walk fast anymore," she said, laughing softly. "It's okay." Sundar replied, "I'll walk slower. I've been running too long." A few weeks later, Sundar was invited to speak at another major tech summit. He was the final speaker. The lights dimmed. The audience waited. He walked on stage, paused, and said just one thing before beginning. "Before I speak about the future, let me tell you a story of a boy, of a mother, of belief." He shared everything, not the numbers, not the success, but the journey. By the end, the audience was silent, not out of boredom, but out of respect. He ended with this line, "Sometimes, the most powerful name in your life is not your own, it's the one whispered every morning by someone who never stopped believing in you." The crowd stood, applauding not just for him, but for Lakshmi Pichai, for every parent like her, and in the crowd, sitting in the front row for the first time in her life, was a MMA tears in her eyes, but pride in her smile, and for Sundar, that was the only award that ever mattered. Gogo grew. Sundar's responsibilities increased. His name appeared in newspapers, books, documentaries. World leaders called him. Universities invited him. But through it all, Sundar remained the same, calm, soft-spoken man from Madurai. Every Sunday, without fail, he still called his mother. Sometimes, they spoke about simple things. "Did you eat?" she asked. "Yes, Amma. Did you?" "I made sambar today." "Too spicy." They laughed. But one Sunday, she didn't answer the call. Sundar tried again, still no response. He called a neighbor, then a relative. And within hours, he was on a flight. To India this time, not as a CEO, not as a guest, but as a son. When he reached home, Lakshmi was in bed, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Age had caught up with her. She opened her eyes gently when she heard his footsteps. "Kanna," she whispered. "You came?" "Always," he said, kneeling beside her. "You don't have to say anything. I'm here." She held his hand with the same softness that once wiped dust off his school books. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Never forget the child you were, and never let any child think their dream is too small." He nodded, eyes wet, and then she closed her eyes again, peacefully. The news of Lakshmi Pichai's passing was not covered by major media, but inside Sundar, something shifted forever. He took time off. No interviews, no meetings, just silence. Then one day, he stood before his team and said, "I want to start something new." His idea was not about business growth. It was about human growth. He launched an initiative named Project Lakshmi, a program to bring low-cost digital education, mentorship, and scholarships to girls and boys in villages across India and other countries. Not just technology, not just tablets, but belief. He traveled to remote areas, met children under trees, spoke to young mothers, and listened. "My Ummah taught me with no degree," he said to them. "You can teach the world." Within 2 years, Project Lakshmi reached over 1 million. Students. Girls who once thought school wasn't for them started coding. Boys who walked 5 kilometers barefoot now used solar-powered laptops. Families who had never seen a computer started building dreams through it. One little girl from a village school wrote him a letter. "Dear Uncle Sundar, I want to be like you, but more importantly, I want to make my Ummah proud, like you did." Sundar placed that letter next to his mother's photo on his desk. He never replied publicly, but in his heart, he whispered, "You already have." Later that year, he returned to Madurai again, not for a summit, not for a speech, but to unveil a statue. In the school where he once sat on the front bench, a small garden now held a beautiful bronze statue of Lakshmi Pichai, not holding a book, not wearing a crown, just sitting in a chair, smiling gently, the way mothers do. A plaque beneath it read, "She believed in one child. That was enough to change the world." Students walked past it daily. Some stopped to bow, others smiled. Some didn't know her story yet, but one day, they would. Sundar didn't make a speech that day. He simply sat beside the statue, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Oma, we're home." The wind passed gently through the trees, as if she had heard, and smiled back.